The woman who raised me like her own asked me to call off my wedding so my fiancé could marry my disabled stepsister instead. Hey, so the story I'm about to share is about something that happened between my stepmom, her daughter, and me. I'm a 25-year-old woman, and I've been living with my stepmother, Mary, since I was 5. My biological mom was an alcoholic and treated me horribly. She was abusive in every sense of the word. My dad eventually had enough and filed for divorce. He tried to get full custody of me because of how badly she was neglecting me. But unfortunately, the court couldn't really prove just how bad things were, so in the end, both my parents were given joint custody. I had to stay with my mom most days. Her carelessness eventually caught up with her. One day, she left me home alone, and I somehow managed to get out onto the balcony by myself. A neighbor saw me out there and called Child Protective Services. After that, I started living full-time with my dad. The beginning was rough, but things turned around when Dad met Mary. She had been working as an assistant to his divorce lawyer, and not long after everything was finalized, the two of them started dating. Mary had gone through a divorce herself and had a daughter named Jane, who was 2 years younger than me. Jane had a neurological condition that kept her in a wheelchair permanently, and she also had some cognitive challenges due to the same illness. I first met Mary and Jane when I was 4. It was a little strange at first because, after everything with my mom, I wasn't exactly quick to trust new people. But Mary was really patient and gentle with me. She never rushed anything and just let me take my time. Slowly, I opened up, and within a few weeks, I'd grown incredibly close to both her and Jane. Not long after that, Dad and Mary got married. From what I can remember, their wedding was small and intimate, just my grandparents and her parents were there. Before they got married, I used to call her Mary, but after the wedding, I started calling her Mom. She really earned that title. Everything started to improve from that point forward. Mary eventually opened her own law practice, and my dad, who worked in construction, ended up launching his own construction company. His business really took off, and from then on, we never had to worry about money again. Jane and I both attended top schools and lived a good, comfortable life. I always treated Jane like she was my real sister. I was there for her, helped her however I could, and stood up for her whenever she needed it. To me, Mary was the only real mom I ever had, because she never once let me down. I've always been thankful for everything she's done. I honestly believe I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for her, and I've never held back in showing her just how much she means to me. When I was about to start high school, we moved to a nicer neighborhood, and that's when I met Ryan. He lived just 2 blocks away and happened to be in my class. Once we figured out we lived so close, we started going to school together and quickly became friends. He used to come over a lot, and everyone in the family liked him, especially Jane. She really felt comfortable around him, which was rare, and the 3 of us had a lot of fun hanging out. Toward the end of last year, Ryan asked me out, and I said yes. When I told my family, everyone seemed happy for us, well, everyone except Jane. From that moment on, Jane started acting a bit off. She'd get annoyed easily and stopped talking to me as much. Mary noticed the change in Jane and figured it might be due to her new medication. I didn't want to cause drama or add to her stress, so I chose to keep some distance and avoid pushing her. Meanwhile, Ryan and I were busy applying to colleges and, luckily, we both got into the same one, a pretty solid school. Everyone in the family was thrilled, and Ryan and I were beyond excited. But Jane was still kind of cold toward me. Before I left for college, I decided to talk to her. I figured we needed to clear the air since she was family. We talked for hours, and as she spoke about Ryan, it hit me she had a crush on him. It all made sense then. Even so, I wasn't about to break up with my boyfriend just to make things easier. So I chose not to bring it up with her. We managed to part on okay terms, and I felt good about that. Before I left, I mentioned to Mary that I thought Jane might have feelings for Ryan and maybe she should talk to her about it just to prevent things from getting messy. Mary promised me she'd handle it and told me that no matter what, I had her full support. I cried a bit that night in the kitchen with her. Leaving my mom behind was harder than I expected. A few weeks later, Ryan and I moved into our dorm and got settled in. The next 4 years flew by. Academically, I was doing great, topping most of my classes and landing a few internships before most of my classmates. Everything seemed to be going well on that front. But my relationship with Ryan was a different story. From the very start of college, things were rocky. We were constantly breaking up and getting back together. I'd even heard some rumors about him cheating on me, and by the time we graduated, things were barely hanging on. Eventually, we decided to take a break, give each other some space to figure things out. After finishing school, I went back home for a few months to reset and told my parents about the breakup. They didn't seem too shocked, which surprised me a little, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. Around the same time, Jane was finishing up high school. She came to me and asked if I could get Ryan to talk to her about her college plans since she wanted to pursue the same major. I wasn't exactly eager to reach out to him so soon after we broke up, so I offered to connect her with a few of my friends instead. But she was adamant she only wanted to talk to Ryan. I decided to put my own feelings aside for Jane's sake and reached out to him. After their conversation, Ryan called me and said Jane had been really flirty with him, and he wasn't comfortable with it. He made it clear he didn't see her that way. When I brought it up with Mary, she brushed it off. She told me it shouldn't matter since Ryan and I weren't together anymore. I didn't push it and just let it go. A few years later, Jane was about to finish college, and I was working and still living at home. One day while I was out grocery shopping, I ran into Ryan. He seemed to be doing well, settled down, happy with his life. We caught up, and after that, we started meeting up occasionally for lunch or brunch. One thing led to another, and before long, we found ourselves back together. After some time of reconnecting and rebuilding what we had, Ryan asked me to marry him, and of course, I said yes without a second thought. But the reaction at home wasn't what I expected. Mary didn't exactly celebrate the news, and Jane's reaction, well, that was even harder to take, though I could kind of understand where she was coming from. But it wasn't until I shared the news of our engagement that everything exploded. Jane had a full-blown meltdown, which turned into an anxiety attack, and we had to rush her to the emergency room. Thankfully, she was okay, but the doctors warned us that because of her health, she needed to stay away from emotional stress. After talking things through with my dad and Mary, we all agreed it'd be best if I moved out just to help keep things calm. So I packed up and left not long after that, though I still came home on weekends. Jane seemed to be doing better. She had finally come to terms with the engagement and even seemed genuinely happy for me. At one point, she was supposed to be my maid of honor, but after the incident, I thought it'd be best if she was just a bridesmaid instead. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Mary, especially, was super involved in the wedding, helping plan every little detail, and even offering to cover half the costs. I was incredibly grateful, and I made sure to say so in my speech at the rehearsal dinner, just 2 nights before the big day. That night, after most of the guests were completely tipsy, Mary pulled me aside and asked if we could have a private chat. I figured she wanted a heart-to-heart, a mother-daughter kind of moment before I got married, so I invited her up to my room to talk. What happened next? I honestly wasn't prepared for it. We sat down, and Mary started by telling me how thankful she was to have me in her life, calling me the daughter she always dreamed of. That alone had me getting emotional. But then she said something that caught me off guard. She admitted she had always wished for the same kind of connection with Jane, but that dream just wasn't realistic. And then she started crying. I tried to comfort her, and in the middle of that, she looked at me and asked if I loved her. I said yes, of course. Then she asked if I felt like I owed her my life. That one threw me a little. It was such a strange thing to ask, but I nodded anyway. That's when she stood up and told me she needed a favor. When I asked what kind, she said that since I owed her everything, she wanted me to give a little of it back, to share some of my life with Jane. I didn't understand what she meant at first, so I asked her to be more specific. What came out of her mouth next didn't just shock me, it made me sick to my stomach. Mary told me that, compared to Jane, I had it all: a good life, opportunities, love, while Jane only had a few things. And one of those few things was Ryan. She said she had known about Jane's feelings for him for years, even back when we were kids, but never acted on it, not until Ryan and I broke up after college. She said Ryan was a kind and stable man, someone who'd be perfect for Jane. Then she asked me, told me, to call off my engagement and convince Ryan to marry Jane instead. I was stunned. Completely speechless. I told her to stop talking right then and there, but she wouldn't. She said this was the one way I could repay her for taking me in, loving me like her own, and raising me as if I were her blood. She said Jane deserved a future with someone who would truly care for her, and Ryan was that person. The only problem? Ryan didn't feel that way about Jane, and Mary knew it. That's why she wanted me to convince him. I was so overwhelmed and furious, I kicked her out of my room. She left yelling behind her, saying I should at least consider it, that she'd be forever grateful if I did just this one thing for her daughter. Her shouting must have caught attention, because a few minutes later, my dad knocked on the door, asking what had happened. I didn't say anything. I just locked the door, shut everything out, and cried myself to sleep without realizing it. The next morning, I woke up late and my dad asked me to come talk with him in his room. Mary was already in there, eyes red and swollen from crying. My dad told me that how I treated Mary the night before wasn't okay, that I had no right to throw out the woman who raised me. It was clear then that he had no idea what she'd said to me. Just as I opened my mouth to tell him, Mary reached out and grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly, almost as if to silently beg me not to tell the truth. I pulled away from her, determined to speak up. But before I could say anything, we heard Jane scream from down the hall. She had fallen in the bathroom and cut her legs pretty badly. We didn't have enough supplies at home to treat it, so my dad rushed her to the ER, telling me we'd talk later. After that, Mary started pleading with me not to tell him the truth, not to ruin her relationship with my dad. I've been holed up in my room ever since. I don't want to talk to her. I don't want to hear her explain or apologize. I'm still sitting with the weight of everything she asked me to do. Update 1. Thank you all so much for your kind and thoughtful responses. Deep down, I knew Mary was in the wrong. But after my dad stepped in and made it seem like I was the problem, I started second-guessing myself. A lot of you suggested I talk to Ryan before saying anything to my father, and I've decided to take that advice. Some folks also asked how I didn't see this coming, especially since I already knew Jane had a crush on Ryan. The thing is, everyone, including Ryan, thought it was just a harmless crush. He never gave her any reason to think he felt the same way, and there were no signs that it went any deeper than that. Looking back, though, there was one thing that felt a little odd. When I went dress shopping for my wedding, Mary insisted on getting Jane a wedding dress too. She said it was her dream to see both her daughters in wedding dresses, especially since Jane might never have the chance because of how people tend to judge her condition. Jane had no idea about what Mary had asked of me. She was still recovering from the fall, and her leg cuts were treated quickly, nothing too serious. When I went in to check on her, Mary was standing silently in the corner. The second I called out to my dad, her face went pale. I had to ask him for the car keys so I could go see Ryan, and right then and there, Mary fainted. She collapsed on the spot, probably thinking I was about to expose her. I helped her onto the bed, and my dad stayed with her, looking at me like I was the reason she'd fallen apart. I didn't bother trying to explain. I just took the car keys and left. I'm writing this part right after talking to Ryan. I texted him and asked if we could meet in my car so we wouldn't draw any unwanted attention. I guess he could tell by my tone that it was something serious because he came downstairs in a hurry. I told him everything that happened with Mary the night before, and how Jane's little crush on him clearly wasn't so little after all. He was stunned. Honestly, even more than I was. He had always held Mary in high regard, saw her as a strong, caring woman, and respected her for how she stepped in and raised me like her own. Ryan took a moment, then said that something like this would take a lot of processing, and maybe it'd be best if we postponed the wedding for a few weeks. He told me point blank that no matter what came of this, he was on my side. He even said he'd elope with me if it came to that. That meant more than I can say. He offered to come with me when I told my dad, but I said no. I felt like I needed to talk to my dad alone first. It was still a family matter at the core. He understood and told me to call him the minute I was done. Meanwhile, he said he'd let his side of the guest list know that the wedding was being delayed due to personal reasons. Even though I felt a bit of relief having Ryan in my corner, I was still terrified. My dad had been my rock growing up, he'd never let me down. I'd already lost a mother the night before, and the thought of losing my dad too? That scared me more than anything. Update 2. So, a lot happened after that last update. I finally gathered the nerve to go back to the house and talk to my dad. Mary opened the door when I got there. Strangely, she didn't seem nearly as stressed as she'd been the night before. When I stepped into the room, I saw Dad sitting on the bed with Jane lying beside him. He looked furious. Before I could say anything, he told me to sit down. Then he dropped a bomb on me. He said he already knew what had happened last night, and that he was extremely disappointed in me. I was stunned and asked what he was talking about. That's when he told me what Mary had said. According to her, I had lashed out at her the night before, screamed that she wasn't my real mother, that Jane wasn't my family, and that I didn't even want them at my wedding. She told him that when she tried to calm me down, I snapped and said I didn't want her disabled daughter ruining my wedding photos. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mary had twisted everything and made herself the victim. I tried explaining to Dad what had really happened, that Mary had tried to emotionally blackmail me into giving up Ryan and handing him over to Jane, but he was torn. He said it was her word against mine and that there was no way to know for sure who was telling the truth. He suggested we all just try to move past it, for the sake of peace. Meanwhile, Jane kept chiming in, backing up her mom's version of the story. That made it crystal clear to me that Mary had already filled her in and told her exactly how to play along. I told my dad straight up that the wedding was postponed, and I didn't care who he believed anymore. The fact remained, Mary tried to manipulate me into giving up the man I love. That wasn't something I could just pretend never happened. Mary jumped in, saying she wanted to apologize if she'd ever made any mistakes while raising me. She begged for another chance, wanted to still be part of my wedding, said she was just trying to do right by her daughter too. Even my dad started urging me to move on, reminding me how much money had already been spent and how things would get messy if we didn't go through with it. But I wasn't buying any of it. I made up my mind then and there. I packed up and left that same day. I moved into Ryan's place, and it's been 2 days since I've spoken to either of them. Honestly, I just didn't have the emotional energy to deal with anyone. I shut off all my social media and ignored the flood of calls I started getting, most likely from relatives trying to get details about the wedding being called off. Things have been really stressful, and I keep hoping I'll find a way to sort through all of this without falling apart. Update 3. It's been a week now since I left my dad's house and we officially postponed the wedding. The calls didn't stop, and then I heard from Ryan that my dad had posted something on Facebook about me. They were still friends on there, and Ryan sent me a screenshot. Apparently, since no one could get in touch with me and my relatives were getting more curious by the day, they started pestering my dad and Mary for answers. Instead of reaching out to me privately, my dad went ahead and made a public post. In it, he said that he, Mary, and Jane had all been begging me not to damage the family's reputation over what he called petty family issues. He said the only way forward was communication, and that I had shut them out. The post made everything worse. Now everyone, from relatives to Facebook friends, was speculating, gossiping, spreading rumors. The ugliest one going around was that I'd stolen money meant for the wedding and then cheated on Ryan. It was disgusting. Ryan started feeling the weight of it all too. I thought maybe he'd start pulling away, but no. He told me, again, that none of this changed anything. He still wanted to marry me. That kind of reassurance in a moment like that. I'll never forget it. I hadn't responded to my dad's post yet. I was planning on going over to talk to them face to face before making anything public. But then things took an unexpected turn that same evening. I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in a while, my grandmother. My biological mom's mom. I hadn't mentioned her before because she didn't have much to do with this incident, but she's always played a quiet yet strong role in my life. She was the one who protected me when my mom spiraled out of control. She helped my dad financially when he was fighting for custody. And even though she usually stayed out of family conflicts, her calling me now meant this was serious. She had apparently heard about the whole mess, and she'd gone straight to my dad to confront him about it. He told her what he believed to be true, Mary's side of the story. But my grandma didn't buy it. She knew me too well. She told me over the phone that she couldn't believe for a second I'd ever say Mary and Jane weren't my family. She knew how much I loved them, how much they meant to me. That was the first time through all this that someone in my family genuinely believed me. I broke down crying right then and there and told her everything. She listened. She believed every word. She told me she couldn't believe how twisted Mary had become and how lucky I was to have escaped that house when I did. After talking with my grandma, I admitted to her how terrified I was of losing my dad. She gently told me that before jumping to any decisions, I should at least try to talk to my parents one more time while she worked on finding a way to help. So, the next day, I went back home. I walked in hoping for a chance at a real conversation, but it didn't take long for things to go south. Right away, they started blaming me again, accusing me of dragging the family's name through the mud. After a few minutes of going in circles, I'd had enough. I asked if I could speak with Mary alone. She agreed, and we stepped into the other room. I looked her in the eye and asked her why she would do something like this to me, especially after everything we'd been through. I reminded her how much I had loved her, how I had always seen her as a mother. She just sighed and said that what she had asked of me came from feelings she'd kept buried for years. She never meant to unload them on me. She claimed it was a mistake. She asked me to forget about it, to pretend none of it happened and just move forward. But I couldn't. I told her straight out that no matter what excuse she had, what she did asking me to give up my fiancé was beyond forgiveness. And I wasn't going to let it slide. That's when she shifted. Her face changed, her voice got sharper, and she warned me there would be consequences if I didn't let this go. I didn't stick around for more threats. I walked straight out of that room and asked my dad, one final time, if he could even consider believing my side of the story, what Mary had actually asked of me. But he just looked at me and said that what I was accusing her of was too awful to be true. He couldn't bring himself to believe that the woman he had loved for so many years would do something like that. He said he couldn't believe his own daughter over his wife. So that was it. I got my answer. I left their house without another word. A little while later, I started hearing that they were telling people I had abandoned them, and that they were going no contact with me. Honestly, I just shook my head. I had a feeling my grandma had something up her sleeve, so Ryan and I decided to head out to her country home for the weekend. Update 4. Now, finally, some good news. When Ryan and I arrived at my grandma's place, this gorgeous little home tucked away in the countryside, she sat us down and suggested something wild. Since everything had turned into a circus thanks to my parents, why not just elope? Get married right there, in her backyard. Ryan loved the idea. He called his parents, and to our relief, they were thrilled for us. The next morning, my grandma called the local priest, and just like that, Ryan and I got married. Simple, peaceful, no drama. Just love. He posted about it on Facebook afterward, and we decided not to check the comments until we were home. But sure enough, my dad and Mary saw the post and recognized the background. They started blowing up my grandma's phone with messages and calls. She didn't hold back in replying. She told them that they were the ones who had turned their backs on me and spread lies, so they had no right to act shocked now. Later that day, I opened up to Grandma about everything that had happened at my parents' house, how Mary had threatened me, how she tried to manipulate me again. I asked if she had anything planned to deal with them. She just looked at me and asked what I wanted. I didn't even hesitate. I told her I wanted Mary exposed for what she'd done. After the stunt she pulled, I was done pretending. I also figured Jane already knew more than she let on. That's when Grandma shared her plan. She told me she had a large sum of money from her divorce settlement, money she'd never touched. She was going to publicly announce that she was leaving it all to me, so I could start over now that I'd been abandoned by my parents. Her bet? That the mention of money would pull them out of hiding and bring the truth to light. And if Mary slipped up, Grandma had a backup. She said I had accidentally called her that night during the confrontation. She had some of it recorded. With nothing left to lose, I agreed. The next day, my grandma called my dad and told him about the money. Just as expected, both he and Mary were shocked and asked if they could meet in person. That evening, they showed up at my grandma's house, Jane included. They congratulated Ryan and me on the wedding, but things stayed polite, stiff, fake. After dinner, Mary asked if she could speak to me privately. We went into the other room, and she started talking about how peaceful my life seemed now, married and secure with this money. I cut her off and asked what exactly she wanted from this conversation. She finally admitted what she had said to me that night was out of line. She apologized for asking me to give up Ryan and convince him to be with Jane. Said it came from a place of motherly instinct. I waited. I thought maybe she would finally take full responsibility, maybe even say she still saw me as her daughter and wanted to make things right. But instead, she pivoted. She said now that I had money, maybe I could give some of it to Jane. She explained how hard life was going to be for her daughter, how unfair the world was, and since I was married to the man Jane had loved, this was the least I could do. I didn't respond. I just kept my eyes fixed on the kitchen door behind her. And thank God I did, because my dad had come looking for us and was standing right there, quietly listening to the whole thing. Mary hadn't even noticed him. She kept talking, trying to push me into giving Jane half the money. Once she finally saw where I was looking and turned around, the look on her face said it all. My dad had heard everything. She tried backpedaling, scrambling to explain, but ended up saying even more incriminating things, how she'd been planning this for a while, how she'd done it all for Jane. That's when Dad turned to Jane and asked her if she'd known. Jane froze, then nodded slowly. I think even she realized there was no way to lie anymore. My dad turned to me, looked heartbroken, and apologized for not believing me. Then he told Mary and Jane to leave my grandma's house first thing in the morning. Mary begged him to reconsider, saying Jane's condition made it hard for them to just go, but he wasn't having it. I asked my dad to go lie down. This was a lot for him to take in. Ryan walked into his room, and Mary and Jane spent the night in the guest room. No one spoke to them, and the air was heavy with silence. Mary knew the game was over. That night, I cried harder than I had in weeks. I thought about how, just a few months ago, we had been a family. Ryan sat beside me and told me I wasn't alone anymore, he was my family now. The next morning, Mary and Jane left. My dad stayed 2 more days, and before he left, he apologized again and again. I told him his doubt had hurt me, that it would take time for me to rebuild trust with him. He looked crushed, but agreed to give me the space I needed. Ryan and I left that day too, and before we left, I asked my grandma if she'd come stay with us sometime. She smiled and said maybe next summer. Update 5. It's been 4 months since everything went down, and I wanted to give you all a final update since so many of you have been asking. My dad ended up divorcing Mary. He told me he still wanted to be there for Jane if she needed him, but Mary said no. She didn't want him in Jane's life anymore. Mary tried everything to win him back, calls, texts, even showing up at his place once, but nothing worked. He was done. She never once apologized to me. Not for the manipulation, not for the lies, not even for dragging Jane into all of it. Her only excuse was that she did what she did for her child, and that somehow made it okay in her mind. As for me, I'm just glad she's out of my life for good.